So let's look at some examples of how to use the Suggest Vendor Payments badge. And to do so, I will have to go to the payment journals, of course. So if I click on Cash Management, I can open the payment journals. And I've already used the payment journals before. I remember to post a payment manually. And I will start here with the bank badge. And the bank badge has the Worldwide Bank operating as balancing account. Here we are, and in the ribbon you can see the Suggest Vendor Payments action. So let me click here, and here you can see the basic layout. So, and I will start with the basic layout. So a very simple way to start using the function. So first of all, very important, there's the last payment date. So this is a reference date. The system will compare this with the due dates of my vendor invoices. Then there's the posting date and the starting document number. So here I will enter any number. There we go. And now if I click on OK, you will see, so this is a general remark that you will always get if you don't filter on currency. So the system will now suggest all currencies. But more important, here we will see now that the system creates 3 lines. So the first 2 lines for vendor 10,000 and the last line for vendor 20,000. And if you scroll to the right, you can see the amounts, and that's very important, I can see here the applies to document number field directly on the line, which means that we're working one-on-one. So one invoice, one document per line. However, you can also combine. So let me also show you this. First of all, I will delete the existing lines. And I will run the function again, but in this case, so I will do exactly the same as in my previous example, except for this field. So now I will summarize per vendor, and you probably can already expect what will happen. So now if I run the function, obviously I will now only get 1 line for vendor 10,000. And as a result, if you now scroll to the right, you see that the applies to document number field is not entered anymore. So that's similar to what I've showed you at the beginning of this module when processing the payments manually. Now, if I would like to see the documents that will be applied if I post, I can click here on the Apply Entries action in the ribbon, and there you can see the 2 documents. Okay, so this is how we can use the function in the most basic way. Let's look at some other interesting features that we can use when working with the Suggest Vendor Payments badge. And the first thing I would like to demonstrate is using vendor priorities and available amounts. Now first I will run the badge without. And so here you can see the settings that I will use. So the last payment date is now the 23rd of February, which means that the system will include more vendor invoices than in my first example. I will enter the starting document number, so let me use the same, and I will click on OK. And after accepting the message on currencies, you can see here what the system suggests. And you can tell the difference immediately with the previous example. So a lot more lines are suggested here. Now as a user, first of all, I would like to know how much we're going to spend on paying vendors if we would process the payment journal as we see it here. And that's something that you can do by running the test report. If I go to actions, you can see that there is a test report action. And by clicking on a preview, I can get the test report listing all the payment journal lines, but also the total. So if I move to the last page, and if I enlarge this a little bit, you can see now that this totals up to more than 400,000. That's way too much for me. I don't want to spend that amount on paying vendors at this moment. I only have, for example, 200,000 available. Well, then we can work with an available amount. So let me show you this. So first of all, I will close the test report. Then I will delete all the lines. And I will run the badge again. So I will run it again with the same last payment date, so the 23rd of February. But in this case, let me click on Show More. A number of additional options will appear. And here you can see that there is an available amount field. So, and that could be very interesting because like I just said, if I only want to spend a certain amount on paying vendors at this moment, I can enter the amount here, for example, 200,000. Now at the same time, the system automatically selects use vendor priority, and more information on that in a few moments. So let me now enter the starting document number. There we go. And I will click on OK. So now you can see that only 5 lines are suggested. So not all the lines that we just saw, but only these 5 lines. And now, very important, if I go to Actions and if I click on Test Report, and if I ask the preview, you can see now, so let me enlarge this a little bit, that this totals to 199,970. So it's very clear that the system took into account the available amount. So very interesting. But why these vendors? Why these invoices? Well, this is because of the vendor priority. Now, if we go to a vendor, and so for example, if I select a vendor 10,000 and then if I click on card, there we go. If you then scroll down and expand the Payments Fast tab, you can see here the priority field. And for this vendor, this is 1. And 1 is the highest priority. And for that reason, this vendor is suggested now in the payment journal. Vendors with priority 2, so for example, if I would move to vendor 20,000, you can see here priority 2, which is a lower priority. And for that reason, because the available amount is only 200,000, vendor 20,000 is not suggested, even though we might have overdue invoices based on the last payment date. But the system will take into account the available amount and first will suggest all vendors with priority 1, then priority 2, and so on. Let's now look at another very useful feature, and to explain, let me run the suggest vendor payments batch again. I will stick with the same posting date. Now I will not use an available amount anymore, so the system can suggest everything based on the last payment date. I will enter my starting document number, there we go, and I will run it just as I did previously. And we can see now again all the lines appearing. Now, what is very important here is that all these lines carry the same posting date. So we will pay all these invoices, all these vendors on the same date. At this moment, Kronos' work date, the 23rd of January. However, not all these invoices have the same due date. So if I scroll to the right, you can see here the applies to document due date. And maybe some invoices are overdue. We should already have paid them at the end of 2019, for example. But there are also invoices that only should be paid in February, and the 4th of February, even the 12th, and so on. Now, the reason that these invoices are included is of course because of my last payment date, which is the 23rd of February. But again, this means that if you combine these two dates, that we're paying a lot of invoices too soon. We only need to pay the invoice on the 12th of February instead of the 23rd of January. Now, this can be quite easily resolved, and let me demonstrate this. And I will run my batch again, so suggest vendor payments. I will leave everything as it is, except for a new feature that I will now demonstrate, the calculate posting date from applies to document due date. And the system will do literally what it says here. So it will use the posting date based on the due date. So if I run it, if I enter my starting document number, you can first of all, you can see here a remark where the system says that there are also invoices that already should have been paid and that they will be paid on the work date. So the system will of course not use posting dates in the past, but it will use the work date instead. And as a result, you can see now that the posting dates for my different lines can be different. So the 31st of January, the 23rd, and so on. And if you scroll to the right, you can see that some invoices are only paid in February, and the 4th, the 12th. And that's of course, like we just saw, because of the fact that the posting date is now based on the document due date. You see, these two are now exactly the same. So, and this means that we are not paying our vendor invoices too soon. We're only paying them on the due date. Now you can combine the feature with a date formula. So if I go back to the suggest vendor payments batch, if you want, you can add the applies to document due date offset. So, and that's something that you can use to pay, for example, 1 day before the due date. So if you enter -1 day, the system will suggest posting dates of 1 day before the due date. Or also the other way around, if you want to pay 1 day after the due date, you can also enter +1 day. So and then the system will apply the offset date formula to the payment journal lines. Now in my previous examples, I didn't pay attention to the payment type. And in Business Central, we do have a number of options. And for example, if I go to suggest vendor payments, and if I scroll down a bit, you can see here the balancing account type, the balancing account number, and the bank payment type. And one of the options we have is paying vendors with checks. Now, in some regions, this is something very important, while in other regions, checks are not used anymore as a payment device. So it depends a little bit where you're working, whether you're going to use computer checks, manual checks as a bank payment type. But another thing that we can do is pay vendors by creating a file. So by exporting the payment lines, creating a file, sending the file to our bank, and then have the bank pay our vendors. And that's something that more and more companies nowadays use because of the efficiency and so on. Now let's look at an example. And for this example, I've created a new batch where I've linked the Worldwide Bank Euro. And so first of all, let me show you, because you might, if you want to follow this example, you might have to check a number of things. So if I go to the Worldwide Bank Euro, we need to be sure that there is a payment export format specified. And so this is something I briefly discussed at the beginning of the module. And so if you want to create payment files that you can send to your bank, you will have to enter the format here. And also that depends on the region. The European format is SEPA, but in the States or in other regions, they might have other formats that you want to use or that you have to use. So that's something very important. So I've created then the new payment journal batch. So let me go to payment journals, where I have linked the Worldwide Bank Euro. And this is now the batch I would like to use. So there we go. And I will run the suggest vendor payments batch. So I can leave everything as it is, but in this case, for this example, I have entered a currency code filter. So by scrolling down to the vendor fast tab, I have selected currency code and here entered euro, because I only want to include euro payments in this example. So for the rest, I can leave everything as it is and I can click on OK. So the system will give me a currency message, but I will accept it. And there we go. So here you can see now all my vendors in currency code euro that should be paid based on the last payment date. So now it's very important, if I would like to create a file by using the export function, that my lines are don't have any errors anymore, because now the system will check if all the information that it needs or that should be included in the file is available. And you can already see the red lines. These are the lines that don't have all the required information. Now, if you want to get more information on the type of error, you can expand the fact box. There we go. The first line doesn't seem to have any problems, but if I go to the second line, you can see what the problem is, and there is no recipient bank account. So the system doesn't know to which bank account the invoice should be paid. Okay, so that's something could be very interesting to look at potential errors that you might have in order to resolve them. So let's just keep the first line. So that's the vendor I would like to pay. The rest I will delete. So I will select everything and then clear the first line again. And then I will click on delete. There we go. So it's a very simple example, but at least we have one vendor invoice that we can now pay. So there's no error anymore. And next I can click here on export. So if you now click on export, you will see that the system creates an XML document that I can have a look at. I can save the file, for example, and so on. So that's how we can create these payment files. So the file that I now have, I can send to my bank, and they will perform the payment to this vendor. Now, in cases that your file got lost or something else happened, you can go to the credit transfer registers, and there is a function to re-export a payment file. You see, so in case that something went wrong, you can always re-export your payment file and send it to the bank again.